Good day. Welcome to another week. It's Tuesday, and it's time for another devotional. For those that have this may be your first time reviewing this video, my intention is to do a video on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Unfortunately, nature of a pastor's life, I can't always do it at the same time of day, so it's kind of a as it can happen kind of a thing. But here I am. And this is going to be the devotional for today. We're working our way through Proverbs, one verse at a time, and we're on verse 25 of chapter 3. And so that's what we're going to look at and just go through it. I want to give a little background to this verse, as usual, just so we understand where it fits in the scheme of the chapter. But we've been talking the last few verses about the idea that God created everything. It says back in verse... whatever. I got that in front of me here, but back several verses. Just quickly bring it up. Verse 20, by his knowledge, right? Or verse 19 and 20, the Lord by wisdom founded the earth, and by his knowledge the deeps, and so on. So it makes this point back there in verse 19 and 20 that God made everything with wisdom. That's part of his character. And then in the verses that followed, was talking about the rhythms of life. And so we spent the last few verses looking at how there's a rhythm that can be built of confidence and of attention and so on, and identity and so on, all these things. And with the Lord's wisdom, how we can find a better rhythm of life, a better way of living in the world God created with wisdom by learning his wisdom. And it helps us live in this world. So that's been the verses leading up to verse 25. Now here, verse 25, we're going to spend the next number of verses talking about the broken rhythms that we can fall into, ways of life that do not fit the harmony that God designed and what his wisdom when he made the world, how he wanted things to be, so to speak, how we can fall into these disharmonious or broken rhythms. And so that's the idea. So let's read the verse and then I'll talk a little more. So verse 25 says, do not be afraid of sudden fear, nor of the onslaught of the wicked when it comes. So the next verse, which we'll do tomorrow, just gives more to this idea. So this is going to be a two-part one. But for today, do not be afraid of sudden fear, nor of the onslaught of the wicked when it comes. Kind of interesting verse. Do not be afraid of fear, right? Do not be afraid of sudden fear. It's a real thing. Like we really can become afraid of being afraid, and that's a rhythm, right? It becomes a life rhythm, a dysfunctional life rhythm that we can have. And the fear of the onslaught of the wicked when it comes, we can have that fear of it, and it can become very dominant in our life, and we can have a rhythm so dominated by fear that really the heartbeat of our life is being afraid of things, and that's not what God wanted. As he didn't create the world so that we would live in that fear, and the wisdom of the Lord helps us come out of that. So that's kind of the idea in this verse. It's like you can come out of that. The interesting thing about dysfunction is that dysfunction works. It functions. Like lots of people have dysfunctional habits that are what we would say is unhealthy way of living, but they do it because it allows them to get through. It allows them to do it. So like an alcoholic has learned to rely on his alcohol. It's functioning. He's living, but it's really bad. His life is bad. It's fallen apart, and in the end, it actually doesn't work. In the long run, it destroys. But there's this sense we get that, oh, this is working. This is giving me what I think I need, and so we continue on in dysfunction. And then there's all different types of it, and the one that's being mentioned here is fear. So let's go to our 4 questions and see if we can understand this a little better. How we all, I myself as well, can fall into rhythms of fear, and it's not very nice. Question 1, how can we not be afraid when there is real danger in the world? And so, as I've said before, through the book of Proverbs, we will be revisiting themes over and over again because they're just dominant in our life. They're such big themes. So I know we've talked about this in the last chapter, but we'll talk about it again here. How can we live in a life rhythm that's not full of fear when the life we live is so full of danger? And there's kind of two things to think about in this. One is that the danger isn't always what we think it is. And we we have a terrible ability to create danger in our mind that isn't necessarily in the world. And so the thing is we learn a habit of fear, a lifestyle rhythm of fear, then everything becomes scary, whether it is or not. Everything starts to become scary, and you will increasingly see threat everywhere. So there's that thing right there. So one of the things you need to do is realize that there are real dangers. There really are. It's no sense saying, "Oh, don't worry, there's nothing dangerous out there." Of course there is. There definitely is dangers. But the problem with the rhythm of fear is that everything will become a danger to you in your mind, whether it is or not. And so you really need to curb that instinct to rush to fear. Oh no, no. Because it will grow. Fear has a way of becoming infectious, and it grows in you, and it can actually spread just like an infection to others around you. And so we need to be careful not to let fear grow in that respect. And then the other thing to think about with that is that even though there are real dangers, God really is your shepherd. If you have been learning God's ways and entrusting your life to God's hand, then you have to rethink outcomes. Like God may not prevent every danger from harming you. He may not. Although tomorrow we'll talk a little more about that, because I think he actually saves us from a lot more than we even realize he saves us from. But we'll deal with that tomorrow. But he may not save you from every harm, but you can have a confidence in facing the harm because you have a shepherd who's going to help you do that in an effective way, which may include absolutely saving you from the harm, or may include you going through the harm, but you have a God who will shepherd you through that. And when you start to have that understanding, it can give you a confidence to face hardship that doesn't have to look like fear. So there's that. Question 2. Why should we have confidence in a God who will let you get hurt? Like she's saying, put confidence in him. But if you'll let me get hurt, then why would I be like? That's counter to what I want. I want to not be hurt at all. Well, this verse doesn't give us a promise that God will never let you face hardship. I mean, this verse says, that you can have confidence, or it's how it says, do not be afraid of sudden fear, nor of the onslaught of the wicked when it comes. Not if, right? When it comes. The onslaught's going to come. The wicked are allowed. God allows them to live. He allows them to be in the world. He wants them to turn from their wickedness. He wants to give them a chance to do so. But that means, in the meantime, they have the opportunity to be wicked, and their onslaught will come because wicked people will do wicked things. And so we live in a world where wickedness exists, and their onslaught does come. But we don't have to be afraid of it, and we can have confidence in the God who allows that, because if we don't have confidence in God, the onslaught still comes. It comes either way. It's not like, okay, either God will protect me from the onslaught, or I'm not going to put any trust in him and I'm just going to face the onslaught on my own. Like, well, no, it's not about, this isn't about removing the danger. It's about dealing with the danger. One of the antidotes to fear is not getting rid of everything that makes you afraid. And this is how the dysfunction can work, right? We can go, oh, I'm afraid that I'm going to get sick, so I'm going to sanitize everything every 10 minutes. Oh, I'm afraid that my kids might get hurt in the road, so I'm going to keep them in the house and they'll never go outside. Oh, I'm afraid that I'm going to be embarrassed if I do this thing, so I'm never going to do anything like that. And we can fall into a dysfunctional dysrhythm of life where fear dominates our decisions. And we say, because of the onslaught of the wicked, I'm going to hide in a hole somewhere instead of trusting God, right? And what I would say is that we can learn. It's not easy. Fear is powerful. But we can learn to say, okay, I might get hurt, but God actually can prevent me from getting hurt. And he can also help me deal with it if I do get hurt. He can help me go through that. So, of course, I'll put my confidence in God, because what else could I put my confidence in facing the wickedness of the world? I can't live in a hole. I can't live in a closet all my life. I've got to come out and face the world. So, okay, I've got a God who says he can help me deal with that. He can give me wisdom to face that and give me his divine power to face that. So, okay, I'm going to trust him. I'm going to learn the rhythm of confidence, as we talked about in the last verses, confidence in the Lord, rather than learning a rhythm of fear of the world. And it's a better way to live, much more functional. Question 3, why doesn't God just always spare us the suffering? Why does God allow it? And like I said, we've dealt with this in some of our previous Proverbs, but the theme's going to recur throughout the book. And so just to reiterate a little bit, and maybe this is your first video in the series, so just to say for the first time for you, why doesn't God always spare us suffering? Well, I've got some reasons I can give you, and they are good and valid reasons, but the truth of it is, no human on earth completely knows why. I mean, we all wonder that sometimes. We all do. We all wonder, like, why God? Why don't you just always spare me? I would rather be always spared. Part of the answer is God made heaven for that, and the day is coming when there will be no more pain, no more death, no more crying. All those things that God promised will be in the eternal state, and that's cool. So that day is coming. But in the meantime, He allows it, and I can kind of say, well, for this reason, that reason, but in the end, I don't really completely know. God knows what He's doing. And so that's what I trust in. Trusting in God isn't trusting that He's going to do things the way you understand them, that He's going to use your wisdom to run the world. Trusting in God's wisdom is about saying, I don't have the wisdom to know these things, but you do. And so I'll trust that. I'll trust that God really is smart enough to know what He's doing, and that He's really is good enough to be doing a good thing, even though I don't get it. I don't understand it. So as we already read, I think in chapter 2, trust not, do not lean on your own understanding, right? Trust God. Trust God. Don't lean on your own understanding. I don't get it, but He does. And that's part of the trust. And when you get that and you realize that He knows what He's doing, it helps give you confidence. You don't have to live in fear. All right, question 4. All right, how do I do it? How do I not be afraid? I don't like pain, so I naturally fall into fear. It happens easy. So it's hard to not be afraid. How do I do that? Well, here's an interesting thing. Part of it is it's a choice. That's part of the answer, and that will be an answer you'll hear from me often. A lot of the emotional things we do, we think happen to us, but a lot of it is actually there's a choice connected to it. Not entirely. There's mix, but there is a choice connected to it, and choosing not to fear is part of it. Now that's easier said than done, but that's there, and we'll talk about that in another video. But what I want to emphasize today is the rhythm side of things. So there's life rhythms we get into, and one of the life rhythms we get into is the functional life rhythm of confidence in God. Conversely, we can get into a life rhythm of fear. Fear itself can become a habit. You can get into the habit of it, and it becomes your go-to. And by that, I guess what I'm saying is that fear itself can feel safe. That sounds really weird, but it's really true. You can start to have confidence in being afraid. And when you don't feel fear, you can actually come to a point of feeling afraid. And I know that sounds so weird to say, but believe me, it's a real thing. You can actually have the idea that, oh, I feel normal, something must be wrong. And it brings the fear back, because you can get into this habit of fear, because somehow it's like, if I can do nothing else to control my world so that I don't get hurt, I can at least be afraid of it. And it feels like an action. And so it becomes a habit. And it becomes, as I said, infectious. It'll eventually go into all the areas of your life. It becomes a rhythm. And so not being afraid is teaching yourself to come out of that rhythm, to speak against it when it happens to you, and you're like, I'm afraid, and to speak to yourself and say, okay, but I'm going to choose to not be, and God help me, and praying, and God help me to choose not to be afraid, help me to have courage, which is the existence of positive action in the middle of fear. And so I do feel afraid, but I'm going to have courage. I'm going to do the positive thing I know is better. And you do these things to help train yourself out of the habit of fear, and go forward. So there's that. And the other thing I want to say, just to answer that question, how do I not be afraid? Something I've gotten from Scripture, but I've applied my own life. I've had panic attacks, and I've had some pretty awful times of fear myself. So I know what I'm talking about. I've gone through it. But consider the story of the fiery furnace in the Old Testament of the Scriptures. There's these 3 young men. They're in a country that's oppressive to their religion, to their belief in God. and they're given this terrible ultimatum that they have to worship the king of that land instead of their God, or they would be thrown into a massive fiery furnace and then be killed. And they were told they had to do it, and they didn't. They didn't bow down and worship him. So they were given one more chance, and they were warned sternly, like, we will kill you if you don't do this. And their answer to the king at the time was, our God is powerful enough to save us from your furnace, which is really amazing, right? But then the next verse is what has inspired me in my life. They then go on to say, but even if he doesn't, we will not worship you. We're going to worship him. And but even if he doesn't, and that was inspiring, has been inspiring to me in my life, to think these three young men, they were just young, facing fiery death, knew God. They had confidence, God can save us. And they had confidence, but if he doesn't, still he's going to be with us. We'll die with him, and he'll be with us. That's amazing. And out of that, I've learned in my own life two things. One is trust God. Reorient your life. Trust God. He can save me, and he can get me through it. And then the other thing is choosing the pain. I'm coming to the end of my video time, so I don't have enough time to really go into this, but this is the idea. Choose it. Like, instead of being afraid of it and trying to not choose it. Say, okay, if I'm going to go into the fiery furnace, I'm not going to be a victim. I'm going to go in by my own choice. I choose it. I choose to serve God. I will not bow down to you, King. I'm going to go into this. I know it's going to hurt, but I'm going to do it. And what happens in here, in your brain, is you just turn yourself from being a victim into being a victor, right? You no longer a victim of the circumstance. You choose to launch into the circumstance. And fine, I'm going to face it. Whatever comes, God will take care of it. He'll help me. And it changes your approach. And fear doesn't dominate, confidence does. And it changes your life. When you learn to do it, it's not easy. When you learn to do it, it becomes a very good habit. Anyway, that's all I have time for today. We'll cover this again in the future. For now, have you learned to live in fear? Is that your life habit? Consider that it might become a habit to you, and think about how you might be able to get out of that habit. God bless us. Help us to do this, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen. See you tomorrow, God willing.